32 teams in 32 days. This is episode 7, the Detroit Lions episode. Let's bring in Dave Birkett, Lions beat writer for the Detroit Free Press, multiple-time Michigan Sports Writer of the Year. Dave, what's going on?
How you doing, Jake?
I'm doing great, man. I'm doing great. Excited to keep this thing rolling. Episode 7, we're rocking and rolling. The first week of 32 teams in 32 days is underway. So for the Lions, let the rebuild begin, right? Although this rebuild will look different than other NFL rebuilds because paying a quarterback almost $40 million in the middle of a rebuild. Jared Goff coming into Detroit as the new starting quarterback. The first time the Lions fans won't see number 9 out there. And before we dive deep into the trade and what it means, how weird is it to know that Matt Stafford isn't there anymore?
Yeah, I think Lions fans are still coming to grips with it a little bit, frankly. I mean, yeah, for people who haven't been in Detroit, they might not realize this, but Matthew Stafford was legitimately the best quarterback the Lions have had in the Super Bowl era, right? I mean, they've won one playoff game, 30 years ago. And, and Stafford was, some fans loved him. Some fans, I don't want to say hated him, but they thought it was time to move on. But regardless, when he was here for 12 years and he was such a fixture in the community and such a big part of everything that happened, I've certainly got a lot of feedback from Lions fans who are, they're sad to see him go, even though this sort of starts a new chapter for the Lions.
Yeah, so let's talk about the trade. It was inevitable that he was going to be out the door in some capacity this offseason, but this whole thing went pretty fast. I mean, the same day or the day before, it was announced that Stafford was seeking a trade and most likely wouldn't be returning, and then he was an LA Ram before the end of that weekend. How did this process move so quickly?
Well, you're right. I think, Brad Holmes, look, bottom line of it all was, right, new coach, GM, certainly they might have had some desire to start anew, right? Sort of build from the ground up with a new quarterback. I don't know if they would have got there if Matthew hadn't gone to ownership and requested a trade. So that was the first thing. Matthew went and talked to them right after the season. New coach and GM come in. They meet again, and Matthew says, "Hey, I think it's in the best of both parties." Everyone sort of agrees. And then you're right. For Brad Holmes, it was a case of looking at the landscape of the NFL and seeing that there could be some other major quarterback change this offseason. Now, some of that has certainly been stunted, right? We don't know what's happening with Deshaun Watson. The Carson Wentz trade came after, Matthew Stafford. There's certainly some good quarterbacks in this draft. So I think Brad and the Lions didn't want to get caught in a situation where they were the last one at the table, so to speak. They wanted to get out in front of it, and certainly they had a good asset with Stafford, and there was a lot of interest because, frankly, he was going to be the best or one of the best quarterbacks on the market, depending on what happens with Deshaun and Russell Wilson. And so, there was enough of an immediate interest there, enough bidders that the Lions were able to find a deal quickly that suited them. And again, I think everyone is happy to sort of put this behind them and really start building forward with what's going to be a new quarterback, Jared Goff for now, and maybe it's someone else down the road.
Yeah. So were you expecting this trade specifically, like to get a quarterback back, this many picks, to take on this type of contract? I mean, did anyone really see this coming? Some thought he'd go to Indianapolis, Chicago, pretty much anywhere except New England. But no, the Rams upgrade arguably their only weak spot on their roster, get Stafford. Were you expecting to get someone like Jared Goff in return?
Initially, no. Initially when Stafford's trade request got out, it seemed like draft picks were the thing that mattered most to the Lions. And I think they were, but the Lions also wanted a quarterback in return. And Jared Goff is, he's young enough at 26 that maybe there's something there. He played in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. Certainly there's some familiarity with Brad Holmes. It made sense from that standpoint. And I'll say this, as much as we don't know exactly what the future is going to hold for Jared Goff in Detroit, I think part of it for the Lions too was with this new regime, you don't want to be the 1-16 type team when you're going through a rebuild, right? That's a tough thing to stomach for everyone involved. These are competitive people that want to win and for, fans as well. And so I think if you have a quarterback that can help keep your team, keep the head above water, then that just helps maybe establish your program, right? You look what happened in Miami a couple of years ago, and you said, wow, they're doing a really good job. They're winning more than maybe their talent, on the field would dictate. And I think that's what the Lions are hoping that Jared Goff can help them do as well.
So Dan Campbell coming over from New Orleans, there's always an out of left field hire last year. It was pretty much Joe Judge. What is he going to bring here, and why did the Lions kind of go that direction where others said they should go like a different direction?
Well, I think part of it was, look, culture is an overused word in the NFL, I guess. That's really what the Lions, when they set out to, on this GM and coaching search, and they sort of went down parallel paths, right? I mean, this was ownership looking at both of these positions at the same time and then marrying the two hires. So this wasn't Brad Holmes hiring Dan Campbell or vice versa, Dan Campbell, picking Brad Holmes as his GM. What it was the Lions looking at what had worked in the past around the NFL and looking at their own, organization and sort of, the shortcomings and what had failed. And they wanted, and Dan Campbell, they found someone who sort of hit some of the things that they really targeted. And that was, the leader of men, phrase that you hear a lot, a guy who I think is going to let people be themselves. I think that was important sort of after what they've gone through. Not to say he's a complete players coach or a softie or anything like that. He's certainly not, but he's willing to accept people for who they are. And I think the last 3 years, there were too many people that were walking on eggshells around the organization in the locker room. And so they wanted someone that could really be a uniter, I guess, and sort of foster that relationship among players. And maybe that then could springboard them to some success.
Yeah, because like on the outside, I'm obviously not a Lions fan, but on the outside, it kind of felt like the Patricia era, like initially looked okay. And then the last couple of years just did not work. And so like, is this the type of move where they're trying to find someone not out of the ordinary, but someone different, like not well known, just trying something new?
Yeah, I think that happens a lot in the NFL where you look at what you had last and that didn't work. And so you're picking some qualities that are different maybe the next time around. And, that's certainly part of it. I mean, look, the Patricia era, we've covered it, many, many times over the years. I mean, it really did. It started off where, Matt Patricia was the best hire of the 2018 hiring cycle. I think most people thought that, he was coming from New England. He was the hot commodity, he knew Bob Quinn, the GM. So there was lots of hope, but it got derailed really quickly in Detroit. There were the reports from 20 years earlier that, he had dealt with an accusation of sexual assault. And I think that clouded the entire tenure in Detroit. And then he, when he got with the players, he just, players didn't respond to him and his methods. I mean, the players that were there, they had loved Jim Caldwell and the way that he treated them. And they didn't like the way that they felt that Matt Patricia bullied them. And so I think that just, there's a lot of hard feelings from the get-go in the locker room, and that was from the quarterback on down. And it just never worked. That Patricia's methods never worked in Detroit. People weren't buying in, and so 3 years later, that's why we're sitting where we are now.
So let's kind of transition to free agency. It was a quiet free agency period for the Lions, but it did center around re-signing their pretty much premier free agent, Romeo Okwara, who racked up some production. How big is this? Because I kind of thought he was leaving, so this actually surprised me.
Yeah, I mean, the Lions had, obviously after the golf move, not a free agent move, but certainly their big acquisition of the offseason. They had two of their own that, were, I think important players, Kenny Galladay and Romeo Okwara, and they chose Kenny Walk, didn't want to pay the money that he got, from the Giants, didn't want to franchise him. I thought something they should have done. But, Romeo was a young defensive end, 25 years old, will be 26 this year. He has a chance to play with his brother. I didn't know how much the Lions, I knew they valued him, but didn't know financially what they would value him at versus what the market did. And from Romeo's standpoint, talking to him after the deal was done, it was important for him to play in Detroit, to play with his brother for another 3 years. So he didn't get the full free agent experience, but he still got paid well. And the Lions kept a young pass rusher around, and we'll see if he can be a difference maker for them in the future.
And Julian, like we're going to talk about him and some of those young players in just a moment, but I loved him coming out of Notre Dame. I loved the pick. I thought he was going to go earlier, and to know that Julian and Romeo brothers playing together, that's just really cool. But
that's a cool story for sure.
Yeah. So Jamal Williams comes over from Green Bay to add some depth to the running backs. Is that all this is, or is there any cause for concern that DeAndre Swift isn't or can't be an every week 3 down back?
Well, if I was playing fantasy football, I think DeAndre would still be my guy. But I might want to handcuff him with Jamal Williams. I mean, look, Williams he's probably a backup, in Detroit. I mean, Swift is the dynamic guy. He's the guy that's going to catch 50, 60 passes, whatever he's going to catch this year. He's the home run threat. But you look at the money that they gave Jamal Williams. That they paid him well because they expect him to be a part of his offense. And as I sort of look towards the fall, I think he's probably going to run for the same thing he ran for in Green Bay, right? 500 yards, 600 yards, play on third downs, be a really solid pass protector, catch a few passes. He's definitely insurance, a guy that they think that if something happens to DeAndre Swift, that Jamal Williams can be a guy that can shoulder the workload for 1, 2, 3, however many weeks they need.
Yeah. Is it more so of like, okay, so Peterson's gone and we don't want Swift being the only guy in there. We're going to bring someone, maybe overpay a little bit, but bring him in to play the same role he played at Green Bay.
I think that's part of it because, you look at really look at the coaching staff, right? Dan Campbell's a former tight end, right? Anthony Lynn, the offensive coordinator, former running back. When he was, the only time he called plays before was with the Bills in 2016, I think it was, and they led the NFL in rushing. Deuce Staley, obviously the assistant head coach. I mean, there's a really strong running lean to this coaching staff, and that doesn't mean that's going to be the only thing they do, but that's going to be a big part of what they do, right? Different quarterback now. So I think, that because that's going to be so important to what they do, they had to make sure that they had at least they wanted to make sure that they had someone that they could trust at that position if they need to use him as more than just a backup.
So now this wide receiver room, complete turnover. Galladay, as you mentioned, gone. Marvin Jones gone. Most likely Danny Amendola as well. Inserting Khalif Raymond, who I think is extremely underrated. Quintez Cephas, second-year player out of Wisconsin, who I absolutely love coming out of the draft. Have him on my dynasty team. But what does this wide receiver group shape out to be right now? And how big of a need is it going into the draft at the end of April?
Yeah, that's their biggest need. I mean, they signed Alex Anzalone as another linebacker. I think those were sort of 1A and 1B, and adding him really, he's going to be a starter for them and sort of their quarterback of the defense. So I think biggest need, and they don't have a number one right now, right? It's Terrell Williams and Rashad Perryman and Cephas, who you mentioned, but they don't really have that guy that is really gonna, that defenses have to circle and say, yo, this is the guy that we need to stop. And that guy's not out there in free agency anymore. Certainly, he could be available in the draft. I mean, you pick number 7, that's going to be a sweet spot for some of those offensive weapons. Even if he's not, even if they don't go receiver at 7, they're going to take one early in the draft because they need another young guy at that position. And they need a guy to make sure they get the full evaluation on Jared Goff too. So whatever we think of the receiver position now, I think it's bound to change in a month.
Yeah, mentioning the 7 pick kind of brings me to this question. There were reports about when the Stafford trade happened that they declined an offer for Carolina's number 8 pick. What did you hear about that, and how correct is that?
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's the deal that I would have taken. I think I would have valued the present day value of a top 10 pick versus 2 future number ones. I have no problem with the trade. I mean, I think it's good to acquire all this, but I just think the value of getting an elite player that high in the draft is, that can really, really help you. But look, they, part of it, was the draft compensation. Part of it was Jared Goff. Back to what we talked about earlier, that they like Goff and they thought he was a better, whether it's a bridge quarterback or potentially somebody to build around, he was a better at that job than Teddy Bridgewater would be. So certainly the Lions could have had that pick. Certainly Carolina is out big game hunting at the quarterback position. But I think the Lions, when their window of opportunity to win is not right now, it's 2022 and 23 and 24. And so when they look at that, that's part of the reason why they made the deal too.
So Detroit picking number 7, most likely probably best player available. There's a lot of talent on the board, but you have to expect them to target Waddle and or Devontae Smith with this pick, no?
Well, I mean, look, I think everyone assumes right now that quarterbacks are going with the top 4 picks. And so that probably takes the Lions out of the mix for a quarterback. I wouldn't completely rule out the quarterback right if one of those guys is there, if a Trey Lance is there, because again, we'll see what Jared Goff is, but if you're the Lions, you can take a long-term view at that quarterback position. So let's say that one's still on the board for them. in all likelihood, it's probably going to be the top 4 quarterbacks. And then you've got Sewell, Penei Sewell, the offensive tackle from Oregon. I think Kyle Pitts from Florida is in there, or any of the 3 receivers, Jamar Chase, the 2 Alabama guys that you mentioned. I think the Lions would prefer Sewell out of that group. No one has told me that directly, but I just, knowing how they want to build he is as a prospect, I think that's a guy that they would prefer out of that group. Short of that, stay at 7, they're going to get an offensive weapon. And I would put him, in Chase, Pitts, and then one of those 2 Alabama receivers, maybe Waddle first because of need. But I think that's really his choice, because I think all 4 of those guys are really, really talented players and can be really effective in the NFL.
So what would you think of if they took Kyle Pitts? Because there were some rumors before the Niners traded up that, okay, they're going to take Kyle Pitts and pair that with George Kittle and make the world go crazy. What would you think of a TJ Hawkinson, Kyle Pitts duo? Because teams that run 2 tight end personnel can make it happen. It's happened in the NFL, and we've never seen like this type of tight end duo before. So like, what would you think of that?
Yeah, that's who I gave the Lions my last mock draft last week before the trade. Just because, again, I do think, when you're picking that high, you don't want to jump tiers, right? You want to take, if there's whatever the number is that you identify, right? 5 blue chip players, you want to get one of those, blue chip players. And it doesn't matter the position, because those are the most elite guys. Those are the guys that have a chance to be really special in the NFL. And I do think, especially if those quarterbacks go top 4, the Lions are going to get one of those guys in that group. And then you listen to some of the things that Dan Campbell has said, and Brad Holmes has said about how they want to build this team, and Dan talking about how difficult it is to match up with big skill and some of the mismatches that he wants to be able to create on offense. This was well before anyone was talking about draft, but just philosophically what he wants to do, and that's create mismatches. And I think Kyle Pitts is a guy that does that as well as anyone, just based on, and alongside TJ Hawkinson, the Lions would be able to do that as well as anyone in terms of forcing a defense to, or taking advantage of how a defense wants to play you, right? If they're going to play for the run, well, you got two pretty good tight ends that can catch the ball. If they want to play to defend the pass, well, you got 2 big guys there that can help, knock the snot out of somebody and maybe free up DeAndre Swift, Jamal Williams, some of those guys for yards. So I think Kyle Pitts is definitely in play. I think that would freak out a lot of Lions fans, given their history of tight ends, Eric Ebron and Brandon Pettigrew and Hawkinson, obviously all 1st-round picks. But I think Kyle Pitts is definitely in play for the Lions at number 7.
Right. The history is there, because Hawkinson went top 10, or was it top 10?
Hawkinson went 8 and Ebron went 10. I mean, those are the last 2 tight ends to go in the top 10 are TJ Hawkinson and Eric Ebron. So only the Lions would take 3 first-round top 10 tight ends in 7 years or whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, so Ebron was that was actually more recent than I thought, but Hawkinson more recent. I mean, it's worked in the past. Vernon Davis obviously worked with the Niners. He was taken top 10, and I'm not a one to believe in the theory to not take tight ends in the top 10, because everyone agrees Kyle Pitts is just different. He's different than most tight end prospects we've seen in a while. But if they were to take him, I don't think that's comparable to taking TJ Hawkinson. They're different players, they're different drafts, and if he's at the top of the Lions board, as you said, you take him.
Yeah, I mean, look, I do believe in position value, but I also believe, like I said, in not jumping tiers, right? So if you think Kyle Pitts is, let's say again, there's, your top players in the draft, Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Sewell, Pitts and Chase, whatever, right? That's your group of 6 blue chip players. If Kyle Pitts is the only one that's left when you get there, I think you got to take him. And so again, I think there's more value to a receiver than there is a tight end in today's NFL. And given the same grade, that's why I say I would take a Jamar Chase over a Kyle Pitts. But if Jamar Chase isn't there, right, the Bengals, the Dolphins, whoever wants him, I certainly could see the Lions ending up with another tight end at number 7.
Yeah, so it goes. Everyone talks about quarterback succession plans, and if you don't have one, you're screwed. If you do, and a lot of teams are starting to go that route. Packers went that route with Jordan Love, and people didn't like it. But if Aaron Rodgers has a down year, you never know. I mean, obviously they could have used a weapon for their playoff run, but the Lions quarterback succession plan, obviously Jared Goff's contract is huge. He's still very young. Is Jared Goff a replacement for Matthew Stafford, or is he a bridge for someone else? Where do you think they're going the quarterback direction over the next couple of years?
I don't know if they even know right now. I mean, I think, they're hopeful that Jared Goff can be the guy again, right? He's 26 years old. He played in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. But I 100% agree. Quarterback, the most important position in the NFL. Everyone knows it, right? The most important position in sports, I think. And if you don't have that guy, right, that really elite guy, you're probably always looking for that guy. And that was part of, I guess, my thought with Matthew Stafford was, and why the Lions should move on from him, writing this back in the fall, was that just given where he was at in his career with where the organization was at in their state of rebuild, it made sense to me to move on from him. And with Jared Goff, it makes sense that you have him right now because you need someone again to help get your program going and get this thing started. But if you don't look at him as being a quarterback that can win big for you, and win big soon, because again, even though he's just starting his 4-year extension, by the time the Lions are ready to contend, in theory, you're going to have to pay him again. I think you have to seriously consider, another young quarterback. And that's why I say if a guy like Trey Lance is there, I could certainly see the Lions force that position, because that's the worst thing that you can do, is when you really need that quarterback and you have to force it. That's when you end up with a guy like a Christian Ponder or, some of those top 10 sort of picks that really shouldn't have been. But if he's there and you really believe in that guy in the draft, then you take him, because that's just an asset and the most important asset that you can have.
Yeah, and that's interesting to think about, because obviously the Panthers really, like, they kind of had their hands tied. And if the Lions were to take Trey Lance, would you consider, because paying Jared Goff for a couple years, all that money, would you consider that trade to be not worth it, or worth it because they got those first round picks?
Yeah, look, I mean, again, I think, the Lions' opportunity for winning. I mean, this is the thing with the Lions too, right? You think about the Packers, right? They've had a Hall of Fame quarterback that's been starting for them for 30 years, right? Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers, right? 30 straight years of one of the best quarterbacks in the game. And that's a tough thing to overcome for anyone in the division consistently. And when you're the Lions, look at, sort of where this roster is, right? Lack of receiver talent, the remake that they have to do on defense. I don't think they're going to be like 1-16 this year, but I certainly don't think they're going to be, a division contender. And so to me, 2022, 2023, those are the years that you can really start to look ahead and say, well, maybe Aaron Rodgers is fading a little bit. We'll see what Green Bay is. The door's open. We have all this draft capital, all this talent that maybe we can be the team now in the NFC North. And, so if you do get a young quarterback like a Trey Lance, a guy who needs a lot of development, right? He hasn't played 17 games. He didn't play this year. Then I wouldn't look at that as a bad thing. I think that's a good thing, because, the other part of that too is then if Jared Goff is who you think he is as a quarterback, he's going to have more trade value for you in a year or two as well. So I wouldn't pass on the quarterback if he's there. As Brad Holmes has said, picking where they pick, you have to really know that position and do your diligence there. But I wouldn't force it either just to draft a quarterback.
So they're picking at 7, 41, 72, and 88. They have 3 or 2 third-round picks as those kind of key picks. You mentioned receiver, you mentioned linebacker, you mentioned offensive tackle just a little bit with Penei Sewell. What kind of pressing needs do you see when you look at the roster right now?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much everywhere. And actually the Lions' last third-round pick, the one they got from the Rams, is in the 90s, I think is their comp pick. So it's a little bit later, but still 4 of the top 100. Look, they need another weapon on offense, whether it's Pitts or receiver or whoever. I think specifically they need help at receiver just because they're so thin at that position. And again, to make sure that Goff has the weapons, if you think Goff is the guy, that you need to get the proper evaluation on him. Linebacker to me is important. I think they've done a good job with their defensive line. The addition of Michael Brockers, re-signing Aquara, certainly can always use pass rushers, but this draft is relatively light on those positions. And so I think right now the back 7 is a bigger issue on defense. Linebacker, because you can look and you can see some really big holes there in a year. They don't have a nickel cornerback right now. They don't have a second starting safety right now. So there are still some big needs in the secondary. And then why I say Sewell could be in the mix too, beyond being an elite talent, is There's the Lions don't have any depth right now at offensive tackle, and Terrell Crosby, their right tackle, is entering the last year of his contract. So I certainly wouldn't rule that out. If you don't grab an elite guy, though, you just need some sort of depth, a sixth offensive lineman of sorts.
Yeah. So you mentioned nickel corner. This cornerback class, very deep, very diverse. It has a ton of outside guys, big guys, and of course the nickel guys. Not a great safety class, I would say, but I do want to get your thoughts. You said something about the pass rushing class. It's not very good at the top. There's two guys, Kwity Paye, Azeez Ojulari. They're kind of the 1 and 2. Probably not top 10 talents. I like Ojulari a lot more than other people. But then down the line, there are, I think, a ton of guys who are going to go toward the end of the first, early second. And I think most of them are starters. I kind of want to get your thoughts on the edge class if you have done work on it, because you said it wasn't the greatest, and I think I disagree.
Yeah, no, that's fair to disagree. I'm not even going to pretend to know, who we're talking about mid round sort of pass rushers yet. But, I think deep tackle, especially, it's pretty weak.
Yeah.
The two Miami guys, obviously on the edge too. I think those guys probably both be first round picks, although there are some questions about both of those. Obviously, we play last year, and there's some injuries. But look, from where the Lions are at, if going to a 3-4, look, 7 is too high for a guy like Ojulari or something. But you're right, they do need some sort of edge linebacking, presence, a rush linebacker of sorts to fit in there. And that's where I think, we mentioned, Julian Okwara and Austin Bryant. I think the Lions at least have a couple guys on their roster that could fit into that. So I don't want to pretend like I know who the middle round sort of, rush linebackers are at this point. I certainly don't. But as I look at the Lions roster, I don't know that whoever they're going to get in that position is going to be an upgrade for the two young guys that they already have that could potentially fill that role.
So could Micah Parsons be in play? Because a lot of people think he's going to convert to a full edge. I don't, but he has a lot of skills that he if he came out as just an edge, he would be a first round pick. That's how good this guy is. Could he be in play at 7?
So I think he's the only defensive player that if you're picking at 7 and you're the Lions, right, that you'd probably consider up there. I know there's 2 cornerbacks that could be up there, but just, they spent a number 3 pick on Okudah last year. They got another young guy. Don't see them drafting that. So Parsons would be the only guy. And I'm not sure. Parsons said last week that teams are talking to him about being sort of a stacked linebacker on first and second down, right? Being that sort of sideline to sideline guy and rushing the passer on third down. And I think that's probably the right use for him. I wouldn't rule it out again because, if the Lions are going to play more of this 3-4, right, you need some sort of presence like that on the edge. But I just, he's obviously got some off-field concerns. And so I don't know that he's the right fit for the Lions there, coupled with the fact that, you have some really elite, you're going to at least have the opportunity to get a really elite offensive player at receiver, offensive tackle. I think if they stay at 7, I think that's a move for the Lions.
Yeah, I agree. I think Parsons is gonna fall. I mean, I think he's top 5 talent in the draft, but also when you mix positional value with the off the field stuff, we don't really know what position he's gonna play, so we don't know what exactly scheme he's gonna fit. That's the type of mix for a top tier guy to fall. Reuben Foster did it a couple years ago, but that was mostly just off the field stuff. I mean, he was a great talent coming out of Alabama, and he fell a lot. But some of these young guys from last year, Jeff Okudah, the other Okwara, Julian, who I love coming out of Notre Dame. Maybe someone I didn't mention. Which young guy on the roster do you think is set to break out in 2021? Real quick before I let you go here.
Yeah, I'd say Tracy Walker is the guy that, young safety. He's going to play that, sort of, you look at the Saints defense, right? I think Tracy Walker is going to be their Marcus Williams. He's going to be the safety that they're going to lean on for a whole lot in the back end. I mean, it's going to be a young secondary this year. Okudah should start, I do think he could have a better season. I like the coaching staff around him to maybe get that out. Amani Aroye is their other young cornerback. So they have some youth in the secondary. Tracy Walker is a guy that if you look, he played really well 2 seasons ago. Even as a rookie a little bit, when he got some playing time, I thought he showed up a little bit. And then last year, the Lions moved him around. His cousin was killed in Atlanta last spring. So there's a lot of, or in Georgia, I should say, not Atlanta. So, I think there's a lot of legitimate explanations for maybe why he did not play up to his potential last season. And this season, new coaching staff, I think you're going to see the best Tracy Walker out there.
Awesome. Well, lots of good stuff there. Talked a lot about Jared Goff, Matt Stafford, free agency, and of course what the Lions need to do in about 30, I think it's 31 days before the NFL draft. But follow Dave on Twitter at Dave Birkett. Dave, thanks so much for coming on and spending some time here.
Yeah, you got it, Jake. We'll do it again.
Yes, sir. And we don't leave this YouTube channel, TWSN YouTube channel. Follow, subscribe to us, and keep an eye out every single day for the next 26 something days. Every day at about noon, a 32 teams in 32 days will be posted on this YouTube channel. Thank everyone for listening. I'll catch you in the next one.